baptismal vows, but the baptismal vows, I have to explain why I brought them. It's not, you might be reading something into it that I'm not intending. Um, the first organizational meeting that they had, I didn't go to in Romania, probably a year and a half ago. Don't really remember, but some time ago. And there was a rebellion that took place in that meeting. They had come to some conclusions, and the rebellion was basically an accusation of kingly power. So the decisions they made at that meeting, they put on hold to try to resolve those issues. And there hasn't ever been a whole lot of detail about what came out of those meetings in terms of baptism, because that was part of what was discussed there. So the bottom line of those meetings, one of the things that come out of there is that people that are going to be involved in this organization, this movement, Church of Ephesus, Church Triumphant, whatever label you want to put upon it, that the leadership is expecting leaders of three different entities. They've identified three entities. You're either a fellowship, this little group here, fellowship, or you could be a ministry, actually doing some kind of ministry work out with this message, or you could be a school, or you could be maybe a ministry in a school, or you could be like in Arkansas where we're all three. And what they came up, their decision in the first organizational meeting is if you're going to be a leader in any of those positions, a ministry, a school, or a fellowship, that you need to be baptized. There was other things they no doubt discussed back then, but I'm still not aware of them. I haven't pushed. I could probably find out if I wanted. But at the last meeting that we had in Italy, a couple months ago, there was a baptism that took place in agreement with that previous meeting. And so it's become more of an issue. And when I got home to Arkansas, the people at our ministry, Future for America, and the School of the Prophets and Lambert Church, they're all grappling with the idea of being rebaptized or baptized. And so it became an issue, and I'm not going to be at home for 2 months. I'll be home, but not on Sabbath. So I was kind of pressured into doing a sermon last Sabbath on what my conviction was on baptism. You know, what do you got to say about it? Because I wasn't at the first meeting, haven't made any public comments on it since then. But what I have seen, now this won't have anything to do with baptism, but I'm going to give you a piece of logic about what I have seen. I watched a development of the truth over quite a period of time, and I started seeing truths come together that were being introduced by different men. Like Pippenger had a couple of them, Capo, myself. Not just one person coming to putting a message together, but I was seeing a puzzle come together. And I could tell it was important from my experience. So I determined the last time that I went to Canada, which was a few months ago, and it was going to be a week-long meeting, that I was going to lay this out with what I was seeing, these different presentations, put them together into one line-upon-line presentation. By the time I got to Canada, I realized that I didn't have the ability to do it, that I hadn't seen anything, seen it all. I didn't have a comfort level that I was seeing where everything connected. But I got that comfort level now. I know at least what I want to say about what I've recognized. I'm not claiming that I've recognized everything connected with it, but I know what I've recognized is worth putting in the public arena. And so when they were asking me this past couple of weeks to do this sermon last Sabbath on baptism, I told people that were asking more than once, I really don't want to do it because it's like 5 steps into a study I'm getting ready to do, and some of the premises that are needed to be put in place before I address baptism, there's no way I can put them in place in one sermon on Sabbath. And I also said, I'm not so sure that I see everything yet. I want a little more time to make sure I'm seeing everything the way I'm supposed to see it. But I went ahead and I did it on Sabbath, and when I got done, everyone seemed to say, okay, we liked the sermon, but I knew when I got done, there was all kinds of things I didn't finalize in that hour. I didn't even get close to them. The people that heard the sermon may have appreciated it, but they don't know the parts that got left out that I just didn't have time to put in place. Lord willing, I'm going to put those things in place here. The reason that I'm telling you that, one of the reasons, is to let you know that this material here is designed to get us through this evening and 5 presentations tomorrow. But I'm telling you out front, I don't know if I can do 5 presentations tomorrow. There's been something going on with me the last couple of weeks that I haven't even put my finger on what it was. On the plane flight from Dallas to Sacramento yesterday, I thought maybe I was getting over the hump because it was a cold plane and I was soaking wet with sweat. And I thought, well, I finally peaked out with this. So I was hoping when I woke up today, everything would be good. It's better. But I'm old enough now and experienced enough now to know that anytime I do a weekend meeting, at the end of the weekend meeting, I'm kind of brain dead. And on this particular weekend meeting, we leave Sacramento on Sunday morning at 6. And the reason that we do so is I have to leave on Tuesday for Canada for a week. And when I get back from Canada, we have like 2 days before we go to Africa for a month. So I'm looking at the physical strength that I have right here, and I'm thinking, how much am I going to push it tomorrow at the beginning of this long drawn out trip, which I chose to take, and I chose to be here. But when I chose to be here, I didn't know it was going to go on over the past couple of weeks. So anyway, that's in place about the 5 presentations tomorrow. This is enough material to get us through tonight and 5 presentations tomorrow. But I may jump ship earlier than planned. Now, when I realized that we were going to live stream this live, I was telling the brethren here, I need to think through about some of the things that I'm going to say. And I'll tell you one of them that I wanted to think through to start off with. In Italy, some of the things we did at the Italy meeting, that you probably heard, but I'll put it in the public record, is one thing, we ordained a couple women Bible teachers, women that we have confidence understand this message, that are teaching this message. Terry Lambert from Australia, Tamina Blessing from Portugal. I like that because it's just for the political correctness of it, and I'm not a political correct person, but it's showing the leadership of this movement understands that women are involved with this work. We also ordained some elders, and we're making a distinction between those elders and the 3 that we ordained in 2016. The distinction for a label is we're calling the men in 2016 apostles, people that are traveling the world with this message. Apostle means one that is sent forth. But we ordained a brother that's been working with the French brethren for quite some time, Maurice, and we ordained Noel Del Rosa in Mexico for that area. And we had the baptism, and there's one other thing that I want to say about that work that went on there. Oh, and we asked Parminder's brother and sister-in-law to be missionaries to Africa. Okay, now the reason we asked them to be missionaries to Africa is multifaceted. How many know how many countries there are in Africa? 56 countries in Africa. And how many of you know that you probably really haven't ever seen a true representation of Africa on a map? Africa is so big that when they make maps, they have to shrink it down in order to fit it on a globe or on a map. And if you ever get to the place where you can get Google and see how big Africa really is. When I look at Africa on a map, I think, well, it looks about the same size as South America, maybe. But it's way bigger than that. How many knew that? I never knew that until recently. But the thing about it is this message in Africa is going like wildfire. Um, I mean wildfire. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people that are accepting this message, and it's being carried by young people. And young people have a different set of problems than old people. Um, they're carrying this message, but they're grappling with that they're at the point in life where they want to get married, they want to have a wife, they want to have a husband, so they have those kind of temptations, struggles, and needs going on. And so you've got a message that's spreading across Africa full speed ahead, and there just isn't very many people available to help. Okay, so um, Manjit, who's Parminder's brother, is an expert in finances. Not so long ago, he stepped out of his employment and he went and taught in a university in England, financial management. I could be putting the wrong label on it, but that's what it is. Before that, he would fly to places like Saudi Arabia and he would hold seminars for these people for 6-8 weeks, teaching them finance. Okay, so he's a guy that knows finance. He's been doing self-supporting work for probably 20 years, so he's familiar with self-supporting work. He's a teacher. He can defend this message. His wife teaches this message, and one of the things that they're known for in their teaching is marriage, young people issues, dress reform, health reform. So they were like the perfect fit. They're probably going to go to Sudan. Not Sudan. I didn't think that was Sudan. Anyway, bad on me for not remembering the country. Want to guess at it? No, never mind. I don't want to guess.
55 more chances.
Anyway, but some of you know that Parminder and Manjit are from India, right? Say amen if you knew that.
Amen.
No, they're not really from there. Okay. What it was, there was a country, and it may be Sudan. Okay, but if it isn't, I stand corrected. There was a country in the 1930s and 1940s in Africa that had a big boom going on, and they were building railroads, and there was a big immigration from India into that part of Africa, and that's where Parminder's and Manjit's grandparents migrated to that particular country in Africa that he's probably going to return to now and set up shop to try to help the continent of Africa. So it's kind of their roots secondhand. When the civil wars began in Africa, his grandparents and parents at that time, then they fled to England to get out of the way, and that's where Parminder and Manjit are from. So the reason that we felt like we needed to send missionaries over there, that's what we're calling them, is because I can't count how many countries now that there are ministries, groups, schools in Africa carrying this message. And there's no one there that gives them any firsthand counsel or direction. And it's primarily young people, and there's already some stress factor going on about the few elderly people that are in the message over there. There's starting to be some struggles between them and the youth, because the youth are on fire, taking the message here and there and there and there, and the older brethren are saying, hey, we need to have some organization going on here to keep things managed. So there's already stress because they don't have anyone there to help. So that's why we asked Manjit and Emma if they would go there. Kenya, thank you. Kenya. And Kenya has a big group as well. But now I'm getting to my point to try to make the point. I have a reason for saying that. Tabu and Tyler just got back from Ethiopia. They have an invitation to go there. And there's a group in Ethiopia that, although no one has told me this, I believe that they are the remnants of light bearers. I crossed swords with Ty Gibson years ago when I worked at Hope International, because they had made a choice to separate from self-supporting work and go back under the graces of the General Conference. And there were people that had been working with them in self-supporting ministry in Africa that I knew, and they just cut them off. And before that, they had been giving them financial support. So I knew one of those persons, a brother named David Wilson. I think he was in Zambia, and invited him over to a camp meeting and tried to get him some more support going on because his support base was cut off. But before that time, libraries had been working in Africa. But that was part of the conditions of them coming into the good graces of the General Conference, is that they don't go anywhere any longer unless the General Conference sends them. And they have to break contract. So the reason I'm bringing that up is this group in Ethiopia, it got big enough, this ministry there, that it divided itself into two ministries, one on this side of Ethiopia and one on this side. I think it's south and north, could be east and west, for all I know, but they divided the country. And they took up two different names for their ministries. I forget what the one name is, but the other is light bearers. So I have a hunch that they're the remnants of light bearers. Okay. And they're open for the message. And they're going to go back and teach them again, like they did with just some meetings for a couple of weeks, but then they're going to set up a prophecy school. But here's the bottom line. In the one group, in the one side of Ethiopia, they have 46 churches and over 5,000 people. In the other group, they claim to have a similar amount of people. And at the last meetings that Tyler and Tabo were at, they had 1,000 people in attendance. So the reason I'm putting this in place is part of the biblical study. I think we're going to have to self-identify as members of the Church Triumphant or members of the Church of Ephesus, whatever label you want to put on it. I think that's part of the prophetic test at the end. And if it is, I think the fruits of this movement have to be evaluated. If this movement was going nowhere and it was just getting doors closed in its face, I think that would be a valid consideration if you were thinking about, is this a correct presentation that this movement is the Church Triumphant? And if it is the Church Triumphant, then it demands that, in my mind, that you begin to see the Lord raising it up around planet Earth. And if you took every person that in this movement that we have, that I have personally, not that I'm a team right now, but every person that I have confidence in to teach this message that I know of, it would not be enough just for Africa alone. Okay. Brazil has more Seventh-day Adventists than any other country in the world. And the same thing is now happening in Brazil. They have a school up and running. They really only have one more major obstacle to have their school facility in place. They want to finish a dorm, but everything else is in place. And they have people in Brazil that are bankrolling it. Some of the places we've been helping with finances for schools and such, they don't have any financial income, but in Brazil they do. And now there's another group in another side of Brazil that's opened up, and they're working together, but it's like 2 points of reference. There's a call, Brother Noel in Mexico and Marco are handling in they're going to have the second meeting in Cuba this month, but that's not what I'm talking about. What's the country in Central America that speaks English? Say it louder. Guyana. No? Once again, I should check my. Anyway, we've had an English-speaking group. There's a country down in Central America that's English-speaking. They've been, pardon me? And they've been inviting us to come. That's about ready to happen. Okay. Noel and Heather just purchased their land for their ministry in Mexico. Belize. Okay, there you go. Thank you. The French-speaking Caribbean. You can't keep up with the calls there. On and on. Okay, if there's a place where there really isn't a great deal of activity where you expect it to be in the United States, but you really wouldn't expect it to be because this is the capital of Laodicea, right? But Europe is got people almost in every European country that are presenting this message. Asia, you know, I'm pretty sure, I can't really say. I met a brother in Canada years ago, and he told me, I'm going back to my homeland. I'm going to teach this message. He was from Korea. And now there's people always telling me about Joey Kim in Korea. And they don't know a word he's saying because he's speaking Korean, but he's putting the same lines on the board that we use. Okay? So Korea is that way. And on a regular basis, we hear things out of China, although we don't have people there, but China is following this message. And so, I'm arguing that that would be part of what you would have to see if what we're suggesting about the church triumphant is valid. In the times that we're suggesting that we're living in, on the verge of the Third World War, you should see the advanced labor taking place on planet Earth for these things to happen. And that's what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing that there isn't, it's not even close to enough laborers to fill the need, which is also a confirmation of a repeat of the history of Christ, and on and on. Okay, so I may not have been clear. I wanted to let you know that I don't know how my energy level is going to be tomorrow. I may not stick around all day. I may jump my energy level up. I'm here. We'll try to get through these notes. These notes are part of a bigger study that I hope to do in Canada. The premise of this study is this. When we started arguing, in page 1 of your notes is where the argument I'm pointing to. When we started arguing, we were working with a variety of ministries before 2012, and there began to be tension between us over the book of Joel, some issues that weren't publicly known. But we reached the point where we became under conviction that when you eat the little book, it means you have a message to carry to the Seventh-day Adventist Church exclusively. And when we reached that point in time, then there was a real shaking. That what we were teaching about having just a message for Adventism during this period of time, that was heresy. And from that particular argument, I was led to look at the covenant lines and see an argument that justifies the concept that when the Lord's entering into covenant with the people, he has an exclusive eternal work just for them during that period of time. And it's based upon the history of Moses, the history of Christ, and the history of the Millerites. So that study, when it was all said and done, was called Covenant Lines. And as I went back and I've looked at that study, that's the study I'm talking about is so big. Because in order to put covenant lines in place, to build the logic, you have to go through and show that the 7 churches of Revelation that represent the history of the Christian church, they also represent the history of the Hebrew church from the time of Moses until the time of Christ. And here we're going to get to the point where I'm going to show you that the 7 churches of Revelation, they represent the history of the Christian church from the time of Christ until the second coming. They also represent the history of the Hebrew church from the time of Moses until the time of Christ. But they also represent the history of Adam to the time of Moses. So the entire 6,000 years of the Great Controversy is governed by 3 periods of time that are represented by the 7 churches of Revelation. And we only seen 2 of them, the Christian church and the Hebrew church. We've seen it for many years, but it became part of the argument about upholding the logic of covenant lines, that the history of Moses is repeated in the history of Christ, and the history of Christ is repeated in the history of Millerites, and the history of the Millerites repeated in our history. And once you realize that everything that goes on in those 4 histories becomes valid for the history that we're living in. So initially we were led to understand that simply to defend the concept that when you read that little book, it represents, among other things, that you have a message to carry exclusively to God's people. Okay, so that got put in place for a long period of time, and then Pippenger reached a point in time in his studies, and I'm I'm not defending these things, and I'm pretty sure most of us in here will know the studies that I'm speaking of. But Parmenides reached a point in time where he could see that, and it's interesting, and in these notes, I think in these notes, maybe the Canadian notes, I have this put in place. What do I have put in place? I'll tell you what I have put in place. If you can follow this logic. When I was at Hope International, I had my first arguments over the passage that says that the seven thunders represent the delineation of events that would transpire into the first and second angel's message, and then she also says it represents future events that will be disclosed in their order. And there was a man there that pretty much opposed to anything that came out of my mouth. We used to have struggles about what that meant. Okay? I'm saying this represents that the Millerites' history is repeated in our history, and he's going, oh, no, you're misreading that. So what I'm saying is when it comes to the seven thunders, that's been a point of contention since the 1990s, and it's been in place. And the seven thunders, if we had the ability to track how it opened up over time, how it began to develop, okay, that's the last seven churches of Judah. It's not only that, it's the last seven churches, not seven kings, I'm sorry, kings of Judah. It's not only that, it's the last seven kings of Israel. Oh, no, it's not only that, it's the first seven kings of Judah, and it's the first seven kings of Israel, and it's the seven Persian kings during the time of Cyrus to Artaxerxes. The seven thunders begins to open up in a variety of ways, and it gets to a point in time where, among other things, what it teaches, it gets connected with the bringing together of the two sticks in Ezekiel 37. Is everyone following me? Okay. And we begin to see that from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, that this is the period of time where the two sticks are being joined together. And therefore, this is a period of time where you have ancient Israel intersecting with Judah. The seventh and sixth to the last king of Israel are lining up with the second to the last and the last king of Judah. And in that period of time, from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, we wouldn't have called it this then, but we realized there was two kingdoms in that history that you had to watch at the same time, Israel and Judah. So the Lord was teaching us about parallel kingdoms. Okay, so then he leads us into Daniel 11, where we're seeing that the last president of the United States is Trump. And in the word dominion in verses 2 and 3 of Daniel 11, I believe, it's two different Hebrew words that are translated as dominion. And the one word dominion that's speaking about this period of time from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, it means parallel kingdoms. So suddenly we have a second witness to the same history from midnight cry to the Sunday law, that it is parallel kingdoms, but it's parallel kingdoms internal among God's church with Israel and Judah, and it's parallel kingdoms with the United States and the United Nations, the sixth and seventh kingdom. It's internal, external. And what I believe, among other things, the Lord was doing is he was teaching us about parallel kingdoms, because when Parmenides recognizes Laodicea and Ephesus, he may not have seen it initially, but what you have to see there to see the distinction is two parallel kingdoms. Seventh-day Adventist Laodicea and Seventh-day Adventist Ephesus run together for a period of time. They're parallel kingdoms. So he was not only using the seven thunders to show us about the history of the midnight cry to the Sunday law, he was teaching us a prophetic concept about parallel kingdoms that we needed to have. So when Parmenides recognizes that the church triumphant, if we can use that label without anyone stumbling, is the church of Ephesus, and it runs during the time period of the church of Laodicea, we already had the concept that we needed to see in place. So I was seeing this come together, and I'm pretty sure most of you in here have seen the things that have opened up about the 126 and the 151. Yes? Okay. So when I seen all these various, there's a couple other things that Pippenger and Tyler, some of these other people brought out that contribute to this, but they're not in the forefront of my mind. But what I began to see when I the last time I was going to Canada, I thought I could put it in place, and I realized what's too good is this. I'm going to tell you what it is, and tell you why I'm telling you what it is, and then maybe we'll give you these notes. Is I realized that these four major covenant histories, the time of Moses, the time of Christ, the time of the Millerites, and our history, the time of the 144,000, that they all come from the covenant history of Abram. Okay. The Lord entered into covenant with mankind with Noah, but that was with mankind in general. But when he enters into covenant with Abraham, or Abram, whatever you want to call him, it's the first time he's entered into covenant with a chosen people. Now he's going to select a people that are going to represent him to the rest of the world. So the covenant relationship of Abraham that he puts in place in the prophetic record is different than Noah. There's some connection, but not denying that. But right from the outset, the prophecy of Abram that's going to lead us to Moses, which is the beginning of ancient Israel, and therefore it leads us to Christ, which is the end of ancient Israel, which is the beginning of the Christian church, that's going to lead us to the Millerites, that's going to lead us to our history. Right from the beginning, one of the things that Abram does is he gives a time prophecy, but it's kind of two-time prophecy, because it's 400 years, but it's also 430 years. Okay, so you can take those time prophecies alone, and you can look at the 430 and derive the truth you want out of the 430-year prophecy, and then you can do the same thing with the 400, and you can look at them together because they're the same prophecy, which is 30 years added on to one. But I mean, there's two distinct prophecies. The Bible, Paul calls it 430 years. Abram, it's 400 years. We know it's the same. But one of the things I saw about it was this. Those time prophecies came to the time of Moses. And those time prophecies, there were two of them. And one of the characteristics of one of them is it could be divided perfectly in the middle. And you take the 430-year time prophecy and you go 215 years in, you're at the end of the second generation, beginning of the third generation, and the next 215 years is the third and fourth generation. But the 215 years at the beginning is when they're in Palestine, and the 215 years at the end, they're in Egypt. So there's a specific distinction between those two periods of time, 215, but they're identical. So here's what I want you to see, even if you don't understand all of it. When it comes to the history of Moses, the first covenant reference that we use to show that there is an exclusive internal work done for God's covenant people, you also find in there that there are two time prophecies that are going to test that generation when they are fulfilled. Okay. As an example, what I mean by test. When the children of Israel were in rebellion, and they already selected a general to lead them back to Egypt, they're rejecting those time prophecies that had told them it was time to come out of Egypt. They were tested by that message, that prophetic message, and they were an example of those people that have rejected that test. That's the beginning of ancient Israel in the time of Moses. When it gets to the time of Christ, there's two time prophecies. There's more than two, but there's two time prophecies that I'll point you to. The 490 years, just for ancient Israel, but at the end of those 490 years, there was a week that Christ was going to confirm the covenant. So it's 483. 483. Then the week. Okay, if you want to express it that way, not a problem. But looking at them differently, looking at them at the 490 and saying, okay, this, what the Bible says about this 490 is this is cut off for ancient Israel. This is their probationary time. But there's another time prophecy in there of this 1 week, and you take that time prophecy, and you know what? It's cut right in the middle, exactly in the middle. 3.5 years, Christ would confirm the covenant face to face. 3.5 years, his disciples would do the same thing. So at the beginning of ancient Israel, they're going to be tested, among other things. I'm not saying only by, but they're going to be tested by two time prophecies, and one of the time prophecies is divided exactly in the middle, producing two periods of time that teach two secondary lessons. And then there's another time prophecy. So when you get to the beginning of modern Israel, in the time of the Millerites, you have two primary time prophecies. One of them 2,300 years, one of them 2520. And there's two 2520s, but one of those 2520s, you can divide it directly in the middle in 538, and you produce 1,260 years of pagan trampling down, followed by 1,260 years of papal trampling down. So what I've given you in a very short and sweet way is the three histories that speak, that justify, to establish the history of the 144,000 that we point to in the study of the covenant lines: the history of Moses, the history of Christ, and the history of the Millerites. They each had time prophecies that tested them. And the characteristics of at least one of those time prophecies is that it could be divided right in the middle, and with the division right in the middle, it produces two time prophecies within the complete time prophecy that produce more light. So I'm going to step out of this just for a second. About maybe 6 weeks, 2 months ago, I was sharing with people, not publicly, because it wasn't anything publicly saying it, but there was a brother that left a message maybe, so family, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And they've been to our house more than once, maybe 3 times. But they left a message. And about 6 weeks ago, we got an email from them saying, I really blew it. Can you tell me where to start studying this message to get caught back up? And then I had a guy that turned against me in London in 2008. I believed something, he believed I was dead wrong. What I believed was really serious. Okay. And within a week of that email, in a week's period of time, I got an email from this guy in London saying, I want to apologize for what you understood back in 2008. It was 2006. 2008. It was right. And he's closer to the Binance than me, so I'm assuming that they're encouraging him to get back on the path. But I was telling people, there was one other that's not popping in my mind. There was one other person that had a similar input. And what I'm referring to is, the passage in early writings where they stood on the platform and they canceled those people to cease their complaints, and some of them got back on. I think it even says most of them got back on. I was expecting to see that fulfilled at some point in time, and 6 weeks ago, I began to get inklings that it was about to happen. And then we have in our room tonight a family who's testimony to that very thing. They've been off the platform for maybe a year and a half, I don't know. And in the recent past, they've got back on the platform, and we're praising the Lord for that. But I want you to, I had a reason for including that in here, and it's this. So one of the things that helped wake them up is the group that they were with was at the point of where they were going to reject the 19 years at the beginning and the end of the 2520. That's one of the simplest, clearest, strongest chiasms that you're going to find in God's word. It's too airtight. There's so many witnesses to 1863 and back there in 742 BC to get to where you're rejecting that 19 years is scary stuff. But my point for saying that is this: when we saw that chiasm way back when, of the 2520, We then saw that from 1863 to 1989 was 126 years, and that William Miller's dream, we had already identified that the jewels began to be covered up in 1863, and then in 1989, this is where the dirt crash man begins to uh, pick up those jewels and put them back in place. And we knew that in William Miller's dream, he uses the word scatter 7 times before he begins to read, like John reads in Revelation 5, before the Lion of the tribe of Judah begins to unseal the book. And we know that in William Miller's dream, he's saying to William Miller, come and see, just like the angel saying to John in Revelation 5 onward in the seals, come and see. So we've made that connection, and we've come to understand that this 126 years was a symbol of the 7 times scattering. It was a symbol of the 2520. So if you throw that 19 years out, if you disregard that 19 years from 1844 to 1863, there's no way that you can see the 126. And I was there when we were understanding the 126, and I was teaching it, and then it was pointed out to everyone that, hey, you know, there's 2 different values for is it a many? A template. Check. In one, if you use it, it produces 126, but the other one, if you use it, it produces 151. And that came to light. I don't know how to explain that one, but I'll have other things to teach, and I left it. But other people can begin to grapple with it, continue on. And we've come to understand that both applications are valid. And now we're at the point in time where we see that the 126 that begins in 1863 and goes to 1989, it's valid. But it also, if you begin that 126 in 1888, it ends in 2014. And we understood that, when we understood that is important. No. But then we understood the 151 has those characteristics as well. If you start the 151 in 1850, when the second table is put in place, it takes you to 2001. If you begin it in a second place, in 1863, it ends in 2014. But what we came to understand is with both of those, with the 126 and the 151, if you divide them right in the middle, they do the same thing that happens with the 2520 that begins in 723 and ends in 1798, and is divided in 538, produces the same effect as 8027 to 834 when it's divided in 31, and the same thing as the 215 and the 215 in the prophecy during the history of Moses. So for me, I came to understand what I was seeing some time ago is that the line of the tribe of Judah is taking the study of covenant lines, which I thought was pretty profound way back in 2014 or whenever it came into the public arena. And he's making it much more profound, much more solemn, much more serious. It's taking on implications now about this organizational work and the Church of Ephesus, 144,000. That without putting those stepping blocks in place that the line of the tribe of Judah has done, you wouldn't have been able to see it. But now that you're able to see it, it's pretty scary stuff. So that's what I'm going to hope to put in place in Canada. I'm hoping to get to the point to deal with these time prophecies, the 126 and the 151, not any differently than Tabo did. His presentation's already in the public record. I want to do it from the point that each of these 4 covenant histories, Moses, Christ, Millerites, and us, get tested by several things, but there's 2 time prophecies there that test that generation, and one of the characteristics that allows you to say, yes, this is the time prophecies, is one of the 2 time prophecies can be divided in the middle and produce a valid application. And you can double it up with our history because it worked with both the 126 and the 151, which is doubly significant in the history of the doubling, which is where we're at. So when they're asking me, okay, we're seeing the need for baptism. We understood that in the first conference meeting in Romania. The most I understood is that anyone that's in a leadership position of any of these three entities, fellowship, school, or ministry, if you're going to be a leadership in this work, that you need to be baptized. From what I've understood, the logic that was presented for that is twofold. That if you're coming into this movement and you have not been baptized, then you need to be baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If you're going to be a Christian, you need to be baptized. But Sister White gives us an example that when you have new life, you can be rebaptized. She was rebaptized in 1846. So you can be rebaptized because of new life. But I was seeing something different about a reason to be baptized. That's why I was hesitant to try doing it last Sabbath. And I'm going to try to share a third reason that we need to be baptized in this movement. And it's not necessarily because of new life. It has to do with Jesus illustrating the end from the beginning. And I'm going to suggest we get through these notes that the beginning of this covenant history is Abram. Okay? And in chapter 17 of Genesis, Abram's given a token of the covenant relationship between him and God, and it's circumcision. And it might be in verse 14 in chapter 17. It's in the notes, we'll get to it. But I think it might be verse 14 of Genesis 17. Abram told, if any man will not be circumcised, let him be cut off from among God's people. So I'm saying that that circumcision command with Abraham at the beginning is pointing forward to the call for baptism here at the end. And it carries with it the command that if you don't do it, let it be cut off from the body. Okay, so I'm just telling you where I'm going with this before I'm going with this. It's different. And I tried to do it last Sabbath and I couldn't do it because I didn't put everything in place, which I'm going to try to put in place here. So I hope I covered all the points that I want to cover. First off, I told you a little bit of the history of what's going on in this work around the world. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming to any of you that have any kind of management training or management skills that think about how to manage what's happening on planet Earth with this movement right now, with this many people, and these few people that can teach this message know that it's out of hand. So we're at that point in time, but we're also at the point in time where we're trying to get organized and come into unity, which means implementing some rules, principles. So the reason that I brought the baptismal vows is because if there was any of you that haven't looked at them, I want you to look at them, not because at this point I'm pissing anyone's arm about getting baptized, but it is an issue. I believe it's an issue now that was prefigured by Abram coming back to his group of people and saying, the Lord just told me every man here has to be circumcised. We're going to do it tomorrow morning. Pretty serious business, and if you don't do it, you're cut off. All right, but I'm saying it's that there's prophetic justification for this. All right, and it has to do with the number 8, and it has to do with the very expression of circumcised. Okay. Circumcised means to cut off, right? Cut off that foreskin. Okay, with 144,000, I think are the church that are going to be held accountable for baptism, which was typified by this circumcision. But we know that in Daniel 2, I'm going to give you one example, that there's a rock that's cut off out of the mountains that are out here, and it becomes 144,000. So what I'm saying is that there is symbolism that is pointing to this call for baptism in our history, prophetic symbolism, that we couldn't have recognized before we get confronted with these issues. just couldn't recognize any connection between that stone being put on and circumcision, which is typified in baptism. And circumcision is called a token. And if you look up Hebrew token, it's an ensign. Baptism, Sister White says, is a sign. And the first definition of sign is a token. So circumcision and baptism can be directly connected to the word that we're familiar with called the ensign. So, and if you've studied the ensign, you probably are aware that part of the reason that God's people get lifted up as an ensign is because they're going to get rejected. It's the persecution that's going to be brought against them for the decisions that they make. That's what lifts us up. I guarantee when Adventism wakes up to the idea that there's a movement that is saying that you need to be baptized into this movement, you need to be part of this movement, and you need to self-identify with this movement. There are a lot of people that say they're in this movement, but they don't self-identify with this movement. Some Sabbaths are still going to their Adventist church, and there's still leading people to believe they're just Seventh-day Adventists, and that's good. That's what we are. We're Seventh-day Adventists. At one level, we're Seventh-day Adventists. I'm not denying that. But we're no longer to be Laodicean Adventists. We're to be Ephesian Adventists. Okay. So one other place I'll go, and then we'll try to get through the notes. Internal, external. And I wanted to put all these things in place. This isn't really avoiding the notes. The Lord taught us internal, external, and we got it from the Millerites. When Uriah Smith summarizing the churches and the seals, we looked at what Miller said and James White said. But for me, Uriah Smith said it best. He said, the seven churches represent the internal experience of the Christian church. The seven seals represent the external. And from that quote, that's a paraphrase, we pick up this idea of internal, external. And we came to understand that it's important to see in prophecy. And now we get to a point where there's people that are leaving this movement because they don't like how we're defining the church triumphant. Because we're defining the church triumphant as God, among other things, as God's army that he begins to raise up in 1989. And we're claiming that its walk through history as God's army is perfect. Even though there are soldiers in that army during that time period that aren't perfect, the history of this army is perfect prophetically all the way through. And every step it's made so far has been according to God's plan. And that's causing people to stumble and jump ship. But when you consider the fact that there is passage after passage portraying the remnant people of God as an army, I mean, I don't know how people fight this. They've probably been in church 50 times on Sabbath and sung the song about Christian soldiers marching off to war. I mean, isn't that just a common understanding among Christians, let alone Seventh-day Adventist Christians? So there is a way that God's remnant people are portrayed as an army. And once you get into that, you realize that this army is going to go against every army in the world. The whole world is going to turn upon it. Okay? So the last satanic organization on planet Earth, one of the places it's noted is in Revelation 17. And in Revelation 17, there's a riddle. And you may not realize this riddle was a stepping stone in this movement. Okay, because the understanding of Revelation 17 came to light while we were still working in Hope International. And Hope International and Heartland were the two, they worked together. So we were in that arena of Adventism. And they held very strongly to the wrong idea of Revelation 17. They held very strongly that sixth kingdom was not the United States, it was atheistic France. And their claim was that in Revelation 11, verse 8, there's a beast that comes out of the bottomless pit, and in the great controversy, Sister White says it's atheistic France. So they would not see that that sixth kingdom was the United States. So for me, I'm the new kid on the block. I'm working with all the famous guys. All the famous guys disagree with me on that subject. I got to hold my ground. And where I hold my ground on is their logic was flawed. Because the pioneers say right here that this beast here, it comes up out of a bottomless pit, and it's Mohammedanism, it's Islam. There's a beast that comes out of the bottomless pit in Revelation 9, and it's Islam, and there's a beast that comes out of the bottomless pit in Revelation 11, and yes, it's atheistic France, but the fact that those two beasts are two different beasts points to the fact that the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit in Revelation 17 is going to be a different beast. If you're going to argue that the beast in Revelation 17 that comes out of the bottomless pit is atheistic France, that kind of logic, you could insist it was Mohammedanism, that it was Islam, it was flawed. Especially when Sister White defines the bottomless pit is a new manifestation of satanic power. That's her word. So at that point in the discussion on Revelation 17, you don't realize how much that battle was fought. It wasn't, everyone around was saying, you're wrong on that one, you're wrong on that one. And so, well, you may be wrong, but I'll stand in the spirit prophecy. So God put in place. Now we come in this movement, we take it for granted that the 5 have fallen, 1 is, 1 is yet to come, and the 8 is of the 7. Well, it's good common sense. That's what everyone teaches. That's the way it is. That was a battle. Okay, it's a battle. And it was a battle because the Lord wanted to make sure that we nailed it down hard and heavy. Okay, we got to the point to where we recognize that Rome always comes up 8th and is of the 7. And we could go into Daniel 7 and show that in Daniel 7, Rome comes up 8th but is of the 7. Then we go into Daniel 8 and we show that in Daniel 8, Rome comes up 8th but is of the 7. Then we go into history and show that Rome comes up 8th and is of the 7. It was important to see that riddle. Okay, and the 8th kingdom there in Revelation 17 is modern Rome. And modern Rome is the beast dragon, false prophet. And that's who the remnant are going to go to war against. You follow me? That's the external. And in Revelation 17, when we came to identifying modern Rome as the 8th kingdom, we would say, well, it's of those 7 previous kingdoms, and the number 8 is a symbol of resurrection. And we'd say, what day of the week was Christ resurrected on? And everyone would say the first day. Well, yeah, but it was the 8th day. 8 is a symbol of the resurrection. And 8 is a symbol of baptism, because Peter, in 2 different ways, talks about Noah's Ark being baptized in the Red Sea with 8 people. Or one time he says with Noah, the 8th person. The number 8 is associated with baptism and circumcision. So we would use that to say, okay, this 8th kingdom in Revelation 17 is of the 7. Which one of the 7 received a deadly wound? There's only one that died, and it's that 5th one. It was the papacy received the deadly wound. So when you see one getting resurrected is the 8th kingdom, and you're told it's of the 7, you get the logic? Okay, well, so now we understand. That's external, right? Because how many churches are there? And who's the last church? That's a trick question. Okay, Laodicea is the last church. It's the last church. Seventh-day Adventist Laodicean is the 7th and last church at the prophetic level. But we're claiming there's an 8th, that it's Ephesus. And we understand that the Millerite history is repeated to the very letter in our history, and the Millerites understood in their history that there were 3 contemporary churches. What are those 3 contemporary churches in Millerite history? Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Therefore, in our history, there will be Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. What's said about Sardis? It has a name that it's a lot, but it's dead. What church was Sardis? It was the 5th church. The eighth church is of the seven. And that eighth church is Ephesus, it's Philadelphia. It's all the good characteristics of every one of those churches. It's a final church, and it's the church, it's the kingdom that gets raised up to go to battle, internal kingdom, a remnant that's going to go to war with the eighth kingdom, which is the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet. So the Lord's bringing all these things together at this time. Follow that. What I'm saying when it comes to baptism, we're going to approach it differently than just rebaptism. And you'll see. Okay, so yes. I started at 6:30. I've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes. Well, your time is. So yeah, we sang for a while. Okay, so what's our time schedule? These are the notes we're going to try to get through. All right, let's go till 8 o'clock. Right? That's.
Sundown to 8:13.
Pardon me?
Sundown to 8:13.
Sundown to 8:13. All right, so I'm taking you back now in this study to give you some of the, I've already referred to them, but to give you some of the issues that led us to the study of covenant lines. Because covenant lines is the point of reference for the claim that I'm going to make about baptism. Okay, it's going to be based upon Abram being the beginning of the covenant lines, and Jesus illustrating the end with the beginning. So where it all started, what are you guys whispering about?
Turning the fan on.
Oh, that's outside this.
Is anybody else cold in here?
No, I just wondered if we should turn the fan on with the air conditioner off, but if everybody's comfortable, we'll leave it as it is.
Okay.
We can cut that out of everything but the live stream.
Revelation, we'll begin with Revelation 8 through 10. We did a trip across Europe once. They rented a big van, and several of us got in the van. And we went to a camp meeting. We weren't invited to the camp meeting. Somebody there at the camp meeting knew me, and it got me to speak a couple times there. And it was not my choice to speak there. One of these camp meetings where they had like 10 speakers, and 3 or 4 of them were disagreeing with each other about different stuff. It didn't matter. They didn't care who was teaching what. They were, he teach this, he teach that, and it was just really disorganized. But I got up there and I did something, and this brother that I knew from the United States, sharp guy, he's been laid to rest. He come up and asked me a question about 8 through 10, and I never saw that before. And in Revelation 10, verse 8, it says, "And the voice which I heard from heaven spake again unto me again, and said, Go and take the little book which is open in the hand of the angel, which standeth upon the sea, upon the earth. And I went unto the angel and said unto him, Give me the little book. And he said unto me, Take it and eat it up, and it shall make thy belly bitter, but it shall be in thy mouth sweet as honey. And I took the little book out of the angel's hand and ate it up, and it was in my mouth sweet as honey. And as soon as I'd eaten it, my belly was bitter." And what he asked me was, he says, "You realize that we teach that this is the Millerites, but it can't be the Millerites, can it?" And it was from his question that my thoughts got piqued to realize, hey, it's both the Millerites and 144,000. You realize here why this can't be the Millerites at the surface level. Is prophetically. Sister White, the pioneers understood this was speaking about the history of the Millerites. And Sister White plainly says the Millerites did not know what was going to happen to them before it happened. And here the angel tells John this is what's going to happen to you when you do this. And the people that know are required to know in advance what's going to happen to them when they eat the little book before they do it are the 144,000. So this is speaking more about the 144,000 than it's the Millerites. But in reality, in agreement with what's sealed up in this very chapter about the seven thunders, Revelation 10 is one of the most profound illustrations that Millerite history is repeated in the history of the 144,000, and that's just one of the pieces to the puzzle. But in our history, we have to take the little book that's in the angel's hand when he comes down on 9/11 in Revelation 18. We have to eat that little book, and we have to figure out what that means. And one of the things it means is, Sister White says there from Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 7, 971, the comprehension of truth, the glad reception of the message is represented in the eating of the little book. So when we eat the little book, it means that we're going to understand the message and gladly receive it. But that's not how we put together a full understanding of what it means to eat the little book. You got to go see other places that where a little book's eaten and line upon line, bring it together. And we understood further with Ezekiel and Jeremiah that when a prophet eats a little book, it's defining that you have a message especially for God's covenant people, for Adventism for us. So one of the arguments that came up, or one of the thoughts, observations that I'll point out to you that is taken as just standard by most of us, and I'm afraid some of us don't think these things through and make them part of us, is that when that angel comes down in Revelation 18, he don't have any book in his hand. It's not illustrated in Revelation 18. The only way you're going to see that is if you're a student of prophecy that's studying line upon line. If you're studying line upon line and you're studying the spirit of prophecy, then in these next quotes, you're going to see that when the first angel arrived, he had something in his hand. When the second angel arrived, he had something in his hand. Third angel arrived, he had something in his hand. Therefore, when an angel comes down, he has something in his hand, and what you are required to do as God's people is take and eat it. Okay, so in the box, you see the first angel. It says, and this is the angel that came down on August 11th, 1840. I was shown the interest which all heaven had taken in the work going on upon the earth. Jesus commissioned a mighty angel to descend and warn the inhabitants of the earth to prepare for his second appearing. As the angel left the presence of Jesus in heaven, an exceeding bright and glorious light went before him. Now, maybe you're not familiar with this, but this next sentence is just, it's a key sentence. It says, I was told that his mission was to lighten the earth with his glory. You need to go into early writings if you haven't recognized the significance of this. You'll see that she's clearly talking about the angel that came down on August 11th, 1840, the first angel. But she's saying that he was to do the same thing that the angel in Revelation 18 does. His mission is to lighten the whole earth with his glory. But in Revelation 14, where you see the first angel, that isn't defined there. He cries out, fear God, give him glory, for the hour of his judgment is come. It doesn't say anything about the earth being lightened with his glory. But the prophetess is here, taking that first angel, and she's telling you and I, he's doing the same work that the angel of Revelation 18 does. And when the angel that she's speaking about here, the first angel, when he came down in Revelation 10, he has a little book in his hand. And if his work is to do the same thing as the angel in Revelation 18, then the angel in Revelation 18 is going to have a little book in his hand. Perhaps. That's just one. But notice the next, that's one witness. Early writings 247. Another mighty angel was commissioned to descend to the earth. Jesus placed in his hand a writing. And as he came to the earth, he cried, Babylon is fallen, is fallen. So you know this is the second angel. That's the second angel's message. He has a writing. When the first angel came, John was told, go take the little book out of that angel's hand and eat it. It's going to be sweet in your mouth, bitter in your stomach. So when this angel comes down, it's going to be sweet and bitter. But you got to eat that writing, whatever it is. And then the third angel says, as the ministration of Jesus closed in the most holy place, he passed into the holiest, in the holy place, and he passed into the holiest and stood before the ark containing the law of God. He sent another mighty angel with the third message to the world, a parchment was placed in that angel's hand. So when the first, second, and third angel come down, they have something in their hand, some kind of writing. And God's people got to take it. Therefore, when you get to the passage here from Revelation 2:17 to Pergamos, it says, he that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth, saying, he that receiveth. There's many ways to show how Pergamos is fulfilled in our history. And in the time period of Pergamos, there's hidden manna to eat, and the hidden manna that we are to eat is the word of God that's in the angel of Revelation 18 that descends. It's hidden only to those people that aren't studying line upon line. But if you're studying line upon line, it isn't hidden, and you get to eat it. Not that you get to eat it, you must eat it. And you will, if you do it correctly, you will comprehend it, and you will be glad about it. But once you take this thought into Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you realize you have a message to give to the Adventist church. Jeremiah 15:16 through 21. When people start protesting against this concept here that we're going to get into here, there was already tension going on over stuff people don't know about publicly, and Joel, human pride probably, stuff like that. But we'd all been teaching the very same thing. We've been teaching the very same thing, that if you eat it, this means you've got a message to give to Adventism. But no one had made the distinction exclusively to Adventism, even though it's there in the words. And once that distinction was made, that's what caused the problem. So in that's where the problems began. Satan caused the problems. In verse 16, it says, thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of mine heart. For I'm called by thy name, O Lord God of hosts. Now you notice in your notes, when you eat the hidden manna, you're going to get a new name written. Okay, so this is another thing that we came to understand during this time period. Right from the start, in Genesis 17, Abram's name is changed to Abraham, and Sarai's name is changed to Sarah. And Jacob's name is going to get changed. And you, just with those three, you have evidence that when the Lord enters into covenant with people, there's a name change. Okay, so when you eat the little book, thy words are found, and I did eat them. Jeremiah is called by God's name. He's changed his name. Covenant relationship is what I'm getting at here. I sat not in the assembly of mockers, nor rejoiced. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. Okay, now that his hand plays a part in this history. He held his hand over this part of this chart, and he held his hand over in our history of the more perfect definition of the king of the south. Okay, and when he removes his hand, there's a disappointment that takes place in both time periods. Okay, so Jeremiah is illustrating this here. Like, I sat not in the assembly of mockers, nor rejoiced. He's no longer sitting with the mockers. There's two distinct group of people here. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. Why is my pain perpetual and my wound incurable, which refuses to be healed? Wilt thou be altogether unto me as a liar and as waters that fell? Okay, where's the lie? Though the vision tarry, wait for it, it will not lie. Okay, he's disappointed on April 19th, 1844. Jeremiah, the Millerites, are disappointed. But there's a separation that takes place between Jeremiah, because he's going to remain faithful, and the Protestants. He's not going to sit with the mockers any longer, and they're mocking him. But it was all under the Lord's controlling providence, under the Lord's hand. Okay? Therefore, thus saith the Lord, if thou wilt return, then I will bring thee again, and thou shalt stand before me. If thou take forth the precious from the vial, thou shalt be as my mouth. Let them return unto thee, but return not thou unto them. I don't know if everyone in here does it, but the way my mom trained me, she didn't train me. It's just the way I watched her do it. It's when before she soaked beans, before I soaked beans, you gotta pour them out and one at a time look at them. Because you find little rocks in there. Man, it's nothing worse than eating a bowl of beans and biting into a rock, okay? You gotta separate the rocks from the beans. So in order to separate the rocks from the beans, what does that mean you have to have the ability to do? To see the difference between a rock and the bean. So now we're at a point here in this story where Jeremiah is, if you will separate the precious from the vile, which by implications means that he's reached a point where he can tell a distinction between the precious and the vile. He can tell a difference between the wheat and the tares. Okay. Thou shalt be as my mouth. If you get to the point to where you can see that distinction, you're going to be the spokesman for the Lord. Let them return unto thee, but return not thou unto them. Okay, they can get back on the platform. But once they step off, you don't go to them. They got to come to you. These are hard truths. Even people that are in this message, they struggle with this, but this is what it says. Okay, they got to come back to you. And when they come back to you, what's it say about the angels? In the angels, plural, all of them in heaven, when one sinner repents, they rejoice. So when they come back, everyone rejoices, but you don't go after them. That's how I read it. And I will deliver you out of the hand of the wicked. Okay, Ezekiel 2, 3 through 3:12. Ezekiel 2. Now, why is there anyone in here that isn't familiar with this? This isn't new information for anyone, is it? Okay, maybe that are watching live stream, some of you. But how many, now you ready to raise some hands? How many were in this movement before 9/11? We got 3 hands in the room if we count mine. Okay, how many were in the movement after 2004, the first prophecy scroll that was recorded in the before 2004? Same 3 hands. Okay, so you may not realize it, but if you've come into this message in 2006, 2008, 2012, whenever you have, this message is so big. It's so big, and you have the requirement to go and try to wrap your mind around it, but it's so big that you've taken a whole lot of things just as a matter of fact. Because when someone like me is presenting it to you, I don't take the time to give you the details on how we got there. I just tell you what it was. It makes sense. You've seen several other things that make sense, so you're not fighting it. Good on you. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But I'm saying now that we're getting down to the finish line, that this understanding about covenant lines, you need to know how it come into place and why it can support itself. Because some of the things that it's producing is, for instance, one of the things we're going to get to here tomorrow right off the bat is who the 144,000 are. And Sister White says something like, and I have the quote, you can look at it tomorrow, soon enough we will know who the 144,000 are. We know who they are now. That's been in place. People have not argued, but discussed what that meant for 100 years. Now we know who they are. Who are they? Priests. They're the priests. You couldn't know that before you were confronted with the distinction between the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinims. You couldn't have known that 10 years ago. I mean, now you look back and you say, yeah, I could have known that. Because Sister White says the 144,000 are the only ones that go into the temple in heaven, and we know that only the priests are allowed in the temple. You could have said, no, the 144,000 have to be priests, but you wouldn't have known what it meant in relation to the Levites and the Nethinims. Okay, so now that we're at the finish line, and that's where we're at, I believe, some of these truths, some parts of these truths, it's essential that you know what they are, because Satan's going to do everything he can to blow us out of the water. You got to know for yourself. So in Ezekiel 2, verse 3. And the reason that I'm starting in verse 3 is because in theory I was going to go back and do verse 1 and 2 afterwards. So I know I'm leaving part off. We'll see if I go back. Verse 3. And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me, even to this very day. When we're coming across this, we're all believing it. We're all teaching it. We're not arguing amongst ourselves. We only begin to argue amongst ourselves on this subject once we put in place that what Ezekiel's being told here is to take a message only to Adventism. Once we said it's only to Adventism, that Ezekiel represents God's people at the end of the world, then people said, oh no, I still want to do public evangelism. That's when it became an issue. Before it was said only to Adventism, everyone was teaching the same thing. And we're seeing this. Oh, we have a message to take to the Adventist church. We used to be united on that. Verse 4, for they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say to them, thus saith the Lord God. And they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house, yet shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. And thou, son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee, and thou dost well among scorpions. Be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. And thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear, whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth and eat that I give thee. And when I looked, behold, a hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein, and he spread it before me, and it was written within and without. And there was written therein lamentations and mourning and woe. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, eat that thou findest, eat this roll, and go speak unto the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he caused me to eat the roll. By this time, when we began teaching this, probably 2008, 9, 10, I don't know, we began teaching this without seeing a distinction that's only for Adventism. It's already established among us that are studying that when a prophet becomes part of the prophecy, he's illustrating God's people at the end of the world. And it's also established that the spirit of the prophets are subject to the prophets. They can't disagree with one another. So when you see Ezekiel eating a little book, and you see John eating a little book, and you see Jeremiah eating a little book, it has to be the identical history. We all understood that, and we do understand that. And that's correct. So this is Revelation 10 all over again. Or before. You get what I mean. Verse 4, and he said unto me, Son of man, go get thee to the house of Israel, speak with my words unto them, for thou art... Now here's the point where it became divisive. For thou art not sent to a people of a strange speech and of a hard language, but to the house of Israel. Not to many people of a strange speech and of a hard language, whose words thou canst not understand. Surely had I sent thee to them, they would have hearkened unto thee. So it's being clearly identified. You're only sent to Israel. You're not sent to any of the nations outside of Israel, only to Seventh-day Adventist Church. But the house of Israel will not hearken unto thee, for they will not hearken unto me. For all the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted. Behold, I've made thy face strong against their faces, and thy forehead strong against their foreheads. And as adamant harder than flint have I made thy forehead. Fear them not, fear them not, neither be dismayed at their looks. though they be a rebellious house. Not only did the prophets agree with one another, but here you see some really profound things here if you think it through. It says, if you'll eat this message and you take it to the Adventist church, when you present this message to the Adventist church, you are God's mouth. That's what it just said. They will not hearken unto me, but the house of Israel will not hearken unto thee, verse 7, for they will not hearken unto me. If they don't hearken unto the messenger that take the little book, then they're rejecting God. That was the promise to Jeremiah. Thou will become as my mouth. Okay, so the prophets are all going to agree with one another, but Ezekiel's certainly going to agree with himself. So he's saying in this experience that you're taking a message to the Adventist church, he's going to do something to your forehead. He's going to make it as a diamond. Going to be hard-headed in a good way. So he's not going to disagree with himself. And in Ezekiel chapter 9, especially when you bring Sister White's comments into the picture on Ezekiel chapter 9, the people that have the forehead work in Ezekiel chapter 9 are the people that get the seal of God. And they're sighing and crying for the abominations that are done in the church. And if we get through our notes, where her comments on Ezekiel 9 demonstrate that those people that receive the seal of God, the 144,000, they're so sensitive to sin that it hurts them, it pains them the same way that Christ was pained when he was confronted with sin. But they can't hold their voices. They got to say something. They're sighing and crying. Okay, that's what Ezekiel's doing here. That's what Jeremiah's doing here. And it takes place within the Adventist church. And when does it begin to take place? Go back to Ezekiel 2, verse 1 and 2. And he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. And the Spirit entered into me when he spake unto me, and set me upon my feet, that I heard him that spake unto me. These two verses tell you when you need to eat that little book and you have a message for Adventism. Because when he speaks to him here at the beginning of this chapter, the Spirit comes into him, which is another way to describe the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, right? And he stands upon his feet. And where does Ezekiel see the Seventh-day Adventist people at the end of the world standing upon their feet? Ezekiel 37, verses 9 through 11. When the message of the four winds comes in. That's when Ezekiel stands up. That's when God's people stand up. They stand up at 9/11 when the angel of Revelation 18 comes down. When he comes down, he's got hidden manna in his hand, and we're required to take and eat that hidden manna. And if you want to bring this into covenant lines as we close, in the history of Moses, the 40 years testing time, what began at the beginning of the 40 years and ended at the end of the 40 years? The manna. The symbol of that history was the manna. At the end of ancient Israel, when Christ confirmed the covenant with many for 1 week, what's the symbol of that testing time? It's the living bread that came down out of heaven that was rejected. Christ was the manna. He was the symbol of that testing time. What was the symbol of the testing time of the Millerites? When each of those three angels come, there was a message to eat. So in those three histories, the symbol of the testing time is the symbol of the time period when you're supposed to eat. At 9/11, when the angel comes down with the hidden man in his hand, the testing time begins for Adventism. And it's not an accident that in the Church of Pergamos, it's called the hidden manna, which is the living bread, which is the Word of God, which is the writing, the parchment, and the little book that's in the hand of the first, second, and third angel's message, which tells us that when any angel comes down, they have something we have to do. And when they do, we have to eat it and take it to the Adventist church. And so that gets us started. Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, You're raising up a remnant people at this time that Satan is going to be angry at with. He's going to come down with great wrath. And we as your people have to understand who we are and what is our work and what our business is that we need to be about. We can see that you're opening up your word, that we can recognize these things, that you are trying to confirm the covenant with us, the way you've confirmed it with your chosen throughout the ages. I ask that as we spend time considering these things here this Sabbath, that you would bless us with understanding that we better edify us to teach others and be prepared to stand for the crisis that's getting so close. We thank you for the Sabbath that is now beginning. We know that in the time of the latter rain, we're supposed to pray for the latter rain, and we know that on the Sabbath you promise a double blessing. So we ask that in these sacred hours you would pour your Holy Spirit out without measure and give us a double blessing that you might enlighten and strengthen our spirit and our intellect, the two areas that we need to have sanctified that we might receive your soul. We thank you for these things. In Jesus' name, amen. Literally. She is the church. Yeah. She said that the what? I'm turning this off.
I don't know what people's I'm always cold. You are? Yep.
Right.
And then in the summertime, I bring a jacket.
That's those people
to
outside.
church. This room in particular is always cold.
Yes.
That is
But
because they always have
then
the
you
air
got to
on
make the
and I'm always-
distinction.
I
It's
think
to God's
usually
people,
it
and the
would have
distinction is
so
Israel isn't.
line in the air,
Judah
but I don't
is.
want to be, but I like that.